here can kindly show that off. And I've been in this analytics space from data warehousing, data management, to statistical and predictive modeling, to data visualization, all within that realm. And most recent 8 years or so, I've been a part-time instructor, as you see listed on the slide, with General Assembly and Colorado School of Mines as 2 examples of that.
Great, thanks, David. Jen, are you here?
Yep. Hi, everybody.
Yep. Hi.
I'm Jenn Schilling, she, her pronouns, and I'm here to talk about R and R Markdown and DataViz, which are topics I love to talk about. So I'm super excited to be here today and to get to talk to you about R and DataViz. And I have my own company, Schilling Data Studio, where I train people on how to do DataViz and how to do DataViz in R. I also have some other roles as an analyst for university and a data science mentor for Posit. And I have been working in the data space for a little over 10 years.
Great, thanks, Jen. Linda?
Hi, everyone. My name is Linda Xiong, and today I'll be showing Excel and Google Sheets. I work for a nonprofit called Rocky Mountain Microfinance Institute, and we are dedicated to building an inclusive environment for entrepreneurs through capacity building, capital, and community. And my role at the organization is managing and leveraging our data to understand what impact we're making and how. And I also support our organization's internal learning environment to build better programs.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and for anyone who missed it quickly, I'm Kasey Bates. I work at DataQuest, which is an online learning platform that teaches many of these tools. And I've been involved with Denver Data Storytellers around since the last time we had the last tool fair in person before the pandemic. All right, and Paul?
Awesome. Hey, thanks for having me. Paul Collier. I am the founder and principal consultant of Coeffect, which is a consulting practice that works with small and mid-sized nonprofits to help them use data to make a greater impact. And today I'll be showing off one of the tools that's really low cost and fairly efficient in terms of data visualization. That is Google Data Studio. So excited to be here. And thanks again, everybody, for attending. Pat, I'll turn it over to you.
Sorry, I was laughing when Paul said, thanks for having me. For those who don't know, Paul kind of runs the show for the Denver Data Storytellers. So it's kind of funny to me to hear him say thank you for being included. Sorry to derail us. I'm Pat Hottovy. I'm a BI analyst at Janus Henderson Investors. Also involved in kind of the planning for the Denver Data Storytellers, been helping out for the last few years. And I will be showing Alteryx today. So I'll pass it over to Kasey.
Thanks, everyone. My name's Cassandra Neiss, or Kasey. Since we have 2 Kaseys in this space, I'll go by Cassandra today. I work for Frontline Farming as the data activist and systems manager, and my background is in cultural anthropology, so I kind of come to this work from a qualitative research background. And so we do, even though it's a farming nonprofit, there is a lot of data and policy type work that we work on as well. And so I do a lot of that data communications and evaluation management for the nonprofit. And Kasey,
Great.
I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Kasey. Appreciate it. All right, so I will stop sharing my screen so that we can move into the first presenter, David, who will present about Power BI. And so, about the format today. We have about 7 minutes for each presenter, and the idea is that presenters, kind of up to them what they want to present, but they'll give a brief example or intro of the tool, give some examples of it, talk about some things that are great about it, potentially some things that are challenging or kind of tough to work with, and then also talk a bit about the impact. So that's it for me for now. So I'll pass it over to David. Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to give a nice little whirlwind, we'll do it live tour of Power BI. So we're going to go ETL to visualization in 7 minutes. So here we go. And yes, I did test this morning. It actually did work in 7 minutes, but I do have a backup in case, because things happen. All right, so let's say we wanted to pull some data. CDPHE sounds like a good organization. I've utilized their voluminous insights quite often, and have worked with that organization actually hand in hand over the years. And they have a nice little section on geospatial data, so we could explore that. And a nice little interesting one that I happen to have is they have the ACS, or the American Community Survey data, by county. Well, that would be nice to be able to visualize. So let's start diving into that. And sure enough, they have a nice little page. You could actually even do some visualization straight from there. But let's say you wanted to utilize this data, perhaps, do some transformations on it. Maybe you join it with other additional data. That could be great. They actually happen to download it. But what we want to show kind of the power with Power BI, no pun intended there, is its capability of being able to make these connections with data that if the data were refreshed, and utilize systems called APIs to be able to connect with. And lo and behold, CDPHE does have API resources available on this data. And sure enough, they even have an API Explorer, which we can get to this data and create that API connection directly. And look at that. They have a nice little query URL. So now we're going to get started. It makes it nice and easy. We're going to copy this to our clipboard. We're going to jump right into Power BI and into its get data. We're going to get it from our web. Paste in that URL we just had. Notice it's going to be JSON data that we're going to be pulling in here and create that connection. Now, as I said, we're doing this live, so it's rolling. So it's making its connection, the API connection out to the CDPHE API Explorer. Pulling up Power Query within Power BI. We're going good so far. All right, so a couple items that we're going to step through this process. I normally give a name to your process. Otherwise, you're just going to have the long URL, which is going to be useless to you. So let's call this CDPHE ACS County Data. It tries to be really helpful and really kind of dive into the JSON, which is not exactly what we want to do. So we're going to eliminate a couple steps here first and delete these out of here. And we're going to work right from our table. This is where we can now drill in to be able to get our data and set it up exactly how we want. So we can get into our features here. We're going to expand this to our rows. Okay, now we have all rows of our data, but not to the level of detail we need yet. So we have our features. Let's expand this out. We're interested in our attributes. That's really all we need. So we're going to uncheck the geometry. We're not going to utilize any type of shape files or the like. We can uncheck the original column names. We just want the standard column names to come in. We'll hit OK. Now we can expand that, and voila, here's all of the ACS data that's available. That's exactly what we want. And we can pull all that in. We now don't need kind of the upper level. Think of it as the kind of the header of our JSON data. So we can select these fields and get rid of them into that process. It was great for our initial setup. We don't need it at this point. Now we have our data in. And notice we're getting all of our steps nice and kind of high level documented along the way as we go here. I could do a lot of transformations, but just for 7 minutes case, we're going to focus on the uninsured figures that we have within here. So I can go to a specific column. I'm going to search for uninsured. Top two will be the ones I will focus on. So I'll start with our top one. Just going to scroll this over a little bit. And these are all counts of the number of uninsured. So let's change that data type to whole number. And for our percent, notice it's not in decimal form. This is in full number form. So it's already in percentage format. So let's change that just to a decimal number. So we've changed those to numeric. It'd be nice. It says change type. That doesn't really tell us much. And sure enough, Power BI allows us to actually do additional documentation here. And I can change and note this, that I made my uninsured fields numeric. and I'll get a little eye that I can hover over and provide additional documentation on the process. Yes, there'd be more to do. We're going to save time. We're going right for it now. We're going to go in, close and apply this. Again, doing this live. So here we go, evaluating our data. It creates our data model that we've already set up. We have the steps documented. If the data was updated on our API, we could always have our refresh data. There's all of our data fields. I'll expand my data pane so you can actually see them. Now we can start visualizing. So we're going to make called a filled map, or other fancy name for it is a choropleth. We're going to build that out by county here. So I'm going to select my filled map. I'll make it nice and big so you can actually see something once we start pulling this in. And what do we have? County data. So let's pull our county name and we're going to put that in the location. Give that a moment. Okay, high level. Well, it at least recognizes we have Colorado, but now we have to tell it, well, what are the values for the counties of interest? This is the piece that Power BI doesn't make as intuitively obvious. However, I will mention, as of Monday, Microsoft released a preview of what's called an option that's going to allow kind of additional previews of visualization kind of formatting right along with the visualization. It's called Object on Preview. So I'm not going to turn that on now because I know not everyone may have that, but I just want to let everyone know they're making this step, which is a little bit more complicated, a little bit easier for folks. So we're going to go to our format, our visual, select our fill colors, and then give it a conditional format. And this is where we could tell it, okay, how do we want to place those colors by county? What field should we base this on? Well, we want to do a gradient fill by, remember our uninsured is what we're focusing on. I'm going to do the percent uninsured, and notice, see the little sigma, it tells us that's a new number, so it recognizes that. We could change the colors. We're just going to leave it as is for right now. I will hit OK. And voila, we get our first initial view of our choropleth by the percent uninsured by county, darker color being more, but certainly would be nice if we could hover over and see the value of that too. Well, we can do that. Again, not intuitively obvious, except with that object on preview. If we had that, it would be, but we can still do it. So let's go back to our add our data visual. And notice there's a tooltips field. So let's search those uninsured again. And I could take my percent uninsured, drag that onto the tooltips. And sure enough, now I get my uninsured to show up. But it might also be nice to see, well, okay, we have the percent, but how many? Because some of these counties, especially some of the rural or maybe on the western slope, might be rather small. So let's pull in that number of uninsured as well. Do that. Okay, we have them both, but it has nice long names there. Do I really need some of? No, I don't. And I can use some here because there's only one row per county. So let's rename these. And you can rename it right in the visual. So let's name this one percent uninsured. And we'll rename this one number uninsured. Much better from our tooltip standpoint. Now see the number, but also notice that for the 12,000, there's no comma. Well, maybe we want to change that too. So we can select the field from our data pane, go up to our formatting, select the comma format. And now when I hover over, we can see our number is much more human readable at this point. I have to say, from a live demo, that probably could not have gone any more smoothly. So I'll take it.
Great, thanks so much, David.
Yeah, absolutely welcome.
Now we will learn about R and R Markdown from Jenn.
Thanks, Kasey. And wow, David, that was awesome. I'm not going to do a live demo. I will show you some code, but I'm not doing a live one. But that was really impressive, David. I definitely learned a lot. So I'm Jenn Schilling, and I'm here to talk to you about R and R Markdown and how to use R for DataViz. And R, if you aren't familiar with it, is a statistical programming language. And that means basically that it's a language that was developed to perform functions on data. It was developed to perform statistical analysis and statistical modeling, and it's great for your entire data science process, from like pulling in data to processing data to analyzing it and modeling it and to visualizing it and communicating it. So I love using R. I use it all the time. It's my favorite tool for DataViz, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about it today. So I'm going to pull up R Studio and talk through some of the good, bad, and impact of using R. So this is what R Studio looks like. R Studio is the integrated development environment that you can use to code in R. One thing I love about R and R Studio is that they are completely free tools to use. R is also open source, and what that means is that people can build on top of it. So there's base R, which is what you get when you just install R, but then there's also packages that people have developed to enhance the capabilities of R. So as you see, what I've got open right now is what's called an R script. And there's some things at the top here where I'm loading things called packages. And that basically allows me to expand the capabilities of R. And a lot of the ones that I use for my data visualization are ones that allow us to do some formatting. There's packages that allow you to make more advanced types of visualizations like word clouds and things like that. And so I find R to be really flexible and also really powerful. And I like the free and open source nature of it as well. Another thing I really like about R is that I can use the same processes, the same code for different data sets and for different data visualizations. Once you kind of learn the steps and the process for building a visualization, you can reuse that same process over and over again for additional visualizations and things like that. So the way that our visualizations in R work that I'm going to show is with a function called ggplot, and you set up things like the data that you want to create and the mapping, which tells R what to put on the different axes. So right here, I'm plotting some counts of penguins over time, and I'm telling R to put the year variable on the x-axis and a count n on the y-axis, and then to make one line per species. And you can add things like line color and legends and labels and all kinds of things like that. And you can also make lots of different types of plots. A downside to R is that you do need to learn how to code. I think that R is quite an accessible language for learning how to code. And I feel like it's built, especially with the plotting kind of structure. Once you kind of learn the framework, it seems to me at least to be built in a very logical way. You build plots up layer by layer, and it makes it kind of an easy process once you kind of learn those steps. But there is that downside. It's not point and click. You do have to do some coding. I like that because I think that adds some flexibility, but that can be a downside. By it being a kind of all built in code, by you process your data with your code, you build your plot out with your code, that means that it's reproducible, which is, I think, a positive thing, because that means that I could send this code to you and you could run it and you could get the exact same output that I got just by running my code. I don't have to kind of write out a process. Well, I essentially am writing out a process, but I don't have to write out a process of click here and then do this and then do that, which in some other tools is not as it's not as reproducible in that way. Not to say that you can't reproduce things, but I think when you're doing it with code, it's a little bit easier to reproduce and share. But there is that downside of you do have to be able to learn how to code. I think that anybody can learn how to code. So I think that if you haven't coded before and you want to learn, I totally think you can do it. And I think that R is a great way to get started in that. Another downside of R is that it can be, when you're getting started especially, it can be hard to interpret what's going wrong. The errors aren't always very intuitive. And so that can be a challenge sometimes to using R. And it just takes practice and building up over time to kind of get used to that. There's another type of R. So what I'm showing, not another type of R, there's another thing you can do in R called R Markdown. So what I'm showing right here is an R script, and that's just kind of a whole string of different code. And basically what I'm doing with this code, if you look in my bottom right corner of my screen here, is I'm generating lots of different plots. So the code that we're looking at on the left is kind of generating these different plots on the right. And you can see going through like some different iterations of changing colors, adding titles, things like that. And then we could also save out plots that we make in R. And so you can save like a line graph into a PNG file that then you can use elsewhere. There's also ways to make some interactive things with Shiny dashboards and stuff like that. I'm not really going to talk about that much, but that is that's an option as well. Mostly I use R for creating static visualizations, but R can be made or used to make dynamic things as well. There's another type of R script, I guess I could call it, called R Markdown. And R Markdown allows you to make documents. And so I'm actually going to move over to my web browser. And the code, should have done that a little slower, sorry. This code that I'm showing here, which is an R Markdown document, actually then creates this HTML file. And it can create, you can create Word documents, you can create PDFs, you can create all kinds of different documents from an R Markdown. There's also a new version of R Markdown called Quarto that was recently released, and that's kind of the same thing as this, just kind of like a new version. You can also make slides with it. I actually use R quite frequently to make slides as well. And so when you do an output like this, then you've got kind of your different steps here, and it puts out a whole you can set up headers and things like that. And so it can make a table of contents for you. And then you can have a document that shows all of your code and then the output in one place. If you're I use this a lot if I'm teaching people and sharing out, like, we're going through these different steps and here's how we have the code and here's what it generates. But you can also use this, and I've done this as well, to create a report for somebody. So when I do that, I hide all this code, I generate the whole thing with R, but what comes out in the end is a PDF that has text and visuals and tables, and it's all generated with code, which is great because when I have to run that process again next year to make this, I do this when in my job at the university as an analyst to do some enrollment forecasting, and I have to run that every year. And so once I did it once, then I have that process in place, and it's very easy for me to just pull in new data and generate all of my forecasts and then generate all of my reports from my code. And I get a whole set of a dozen PDFs that have all of the output for different colleges of my enrollment forecasts. And so this ability to be able to reproduce things and create kind of full reports is super, super useful and something that I really, really like to do in R. And then the last thing that I wanted to share, and I'll go through make sure I did, yes, for another good thing that I feel about R is that there's a really supportive R community. There's an awesome group called R Ladies, and there's chapters all around the world, as well as a global organization. There's also Posit, which used to be R Studio, which puts out the R Studio software. They have forums. It's just, I think there's a really good community, a really supportive community. And there's a lot of people building these kinds of open source tools to help grow R. Let me make sure I got through all my bad. Oh, that's right. One of my other bad things. See, this is why I have my slides, because I knew I would forget some stuff. One of my negative drawbacks is that when you're trying to like precisely place things on a DataViz, in other tools, you can drag and drop, and like say, I want this label, I want this part, like annotation, like right here. R, you can do that as well. Like you can specify exactly where you want it, but you have to do that with your code. And sometimes it can be very frustrating to get the thing exactly how you want it to look with the code. So I just think that's another drawback. And again, the more you practice it, the easier that becomes. Also, with the impact, all the steps are in one place, as I've mentioned. It's easy to switch different things around, and you can do really extensive customization, and you can make those awesome reports. And I just wanted to share some examples of like what is possible. I did share a couple of very small charts or very like kind of basic charts, but all of these visualizations are graphs that I made entirely in R. And so you can change font, you can put multiple graphs together, you can use all kinds of different color palettes, you can make all kinds of different charts from maps to like I've got my little like cat images here. You can make calendars, you can make all kinds of stuff. So a lot is possible. And then you can also make kind of complete infographics. I love to read, and I've made this is my one from 2021, but I made it again for 2022. I just didn't put the new one in here, but this is my all of my reading for a year. And this whole thing I made entirely in R. So I made the kind of separate graphs and then put them together in R. And then I also like to write. And so this is some statistics on my participation in National Novel Writing Month in 2021. And again, I made like each individual part is a separate graph, and then I put them all together in R. So I think R is awesome for kind of those high, like presentation ready graphics. And then it's also really great for visual data exploration as well. You can make very basic charts very quickly. And so you can do a lot of kind of experimentation and checking out your data. Or you can make your masterpiece. And those two graphics are from Allison Horst, who makes really awesome R graphics. So a couple quick tips. I think I'm doing okay on time, but Kasey, wave at me if I need to stop. A couple quick tips for learning R. One is make mistakes. So just get in there and like try things out. And the more you learn and the more you practice and the more you kind of learn to interpret errors, the better you'll be as you go along. Keep experimenting and trying new things. Finding a community. So I mentioned R Ladies. There's also a lot of other groups out there. And so if you can find a group of R users, as I said, I've found the R community to be super friendly and welcoming. And so that's a really nice place to get help, especially when you're starting. And taking your time, like take breaks. You don't have to figure it all out in one go. Coding can be really frustrating. I love to code, but I still get really frustrated with it sometimes. And so make sure that you are taking your time and being gentle with yourself and not trying to like just power through. And sometimes just like stepping away from the computer and coming back, then you can figure it out. I'm sure I'm talking to many people here who are familiar with that, of like, you just are getting stuck on something and then you take a little break and you come back and you're like, oh yeah. And the last thing is to practice on a topic you care about. So there's loads of data out there. And if you can find a topic that you're interested in, then I think that's a really good way to learn some more. So I'm going to just put in the chat a couple ways that you can reach out and stay connected with me. And thank you so much for having me. And I'm really glad that I got to be a part of this. And I love to talk about R. So if anyone has R questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen. That was awesome. All right, next up, we will move on to Excel and Google Sheets with Linda.
Hi, everyone. So today I'll be showing Excel and Google Sheets. And so before I share my screen, I just want to talk about a little bit about why. In my organization, a lot of the work that I do is internal data, internal sharing of data. And so Google Sheets and Excel are very accessible programs for that. Most of my coworkers are familiar with using Excel and Google Sheets for like tracking their tasks and things like that. So using the data and then visualizing it within the same program is helpful. I'm also working with people of varying degrees of data literacy. So visualizing data in a simple way for them is really helpful. And while we, and like me and my supervisor, have the opportunity to use like Tableau and other analytic tools like Zoho Analytics, which is, we use Zoho applications in our organization. Right now, we're at a point in our organization where we are using data to inform our work, right? So reviewing our progress towards goals and conducting program evaluation internally. So this is where Excel and Google Sheets is helpful. So the example that I'm sharing with everyone today is data from our impact surveys. So these are surveys sent out to our entrepreneurs on their 1, 2, and 3-year anniversary of graduating from our business launch bootcamp. And it's intrinsically tied to our theory of change. So I oversee the process of both developing the survey and then obviously analyzing it. And so here on my spreadsheet, I've got my data set here. I've got a tab for the pivot tables. So I pulled out 6 questions that have the same answers for all of them. And then I created a dashboard. So essentially I created a dashboard using slicers and pivot tables to visualize that data. Oftentimes we get questions of like, disaggregating data by demographics, things like that. So it's just an easy way for me to have the team be interactive with the data, right? So here on the final dashboard, I've got my slicers here. I just pulled out a few. So when they completed the impact survey, if it's a household with children, and gender identity here. And so you can click on multiple slicers and the slicers are connected to the pivot table. And then I created a summary table here just to see all that information in one spot for my team. Because I don't know, this is 6 separate tables where this is just one table. So very easy to see. And then for each of the questions, I created a simple bar chart and a donut chart to kind of visualize that data for them. So as they select the data, the slicers / filters, the chart changes, right, as you do that. I also duplicated this in Google Sheets. Again, in my organization, we are a G Suite organization, so everyone has Google Sheets, but not everyone has Excel. So sometimes I have to translate between Excel and Google Sheets. I normally do a lot of work in Google Sheets, so people have access to it. But if it's just for me, I use Excel a lot. One of the things that I like about the benefits of using Excel is that I feel like a lot of people are very used to using Excel, very easy columns and rows, and then using the pivot tables, and then creating mini dashboards, right, for the team so that they can visualize that data. If you have comfort like me and are comfortable with formulas and typing that in, that's also a plus there. You have a lot of control in what formulas you want to put in. There's also benefits to formatting, and then just, the interface of Excel to create your own charts. And then I like the option to also save charts as templates, so then I can just apply that to everything else that I create. The other thing that I like too about Excel is that you can link this. Sorry, my MacBook just changed. Okay. You can link this to Word docs, PowerPoints, and then it still links to the same chart. So if I were to copy this chart or copy this data over, it still lives there in the Excel as well as in PowerPoint. Some things that, with this particular dashboard, the intention is that I can just keep adding data, right? And then just refresh my pivot table, and then it just becomes part of the dashboard over time. I guess the challenges with Excel, I have an example here. You got to make sure your formulas are correct. So this is before I added in if errors to all the tables. So just to show a nice clean dashboard for the team before they freak out and are like, why is there an error here? So making sure that your formulas are squared away in that. It is also time consuming. It's not like I built this from scratch, but it's time consuming to put in the formulas, create your visualizations, and then have it all nice and pretty for your team as the final product. And then transferring from Excel to Google Sheets can be a little difficult. Google Sheets has its own, the way that you can edit things is a little different. The way you can pull and create pivot tables is a little different. So you kind of just have to get used to both of them and figure out how to translate what you're doing in Excel into Google Sheet here. For some reason, a quirky thing, I had to put all my pivot tables on the same tab as my dashboard for the slicers to work. Let's see, other things with this dashboard, as well as any kind of other dashboard, to compare it to your original data set. Like if I were to just select male entrepreneurs, you can't really compare that unless you duplicate it and have like, a blank one for all entrepreneurs, right? Let's see. The other thing too is almost all those same functionalities transfer from Google Sheets to Excel. There are pros and cons to using one over the other. But yeah, for the most part, it's really simple and the same. Like as you select the slicers and change your data, everything else changes along with it, and is very accessible. I think that's all I have for Excel and Google Sheets.
Great, thanks so much, Linda. I appreciate it. So now I will present my screen and talk about Jupyter and Python. So what we see here, this is Jupyter Lab, and this type of file is a Jupyter notebook, similar to what Jenn presented about R Markdown. Jupyter Notebook is somewhat similar. It's a very common environment, you could say, for for coding in Python, because you can have a mix of like summarizing your results in what we call Markdown, and then you can also have your code below. And one contrast to our Markdown, I would say, is that I think our Markdown is much better if you're trying to make reproducible reports that look really nice. I know that you can make reports year to year and just update the data and spit out the same report again. I don't think, at least personally, that Jupyter is as user-friendly to the end user as our Markdown, but at least how you work with it, if you're trying to come up with inferences about data yourself, I think Jupyter is pretty similar to our Markdown. And so a little bit more about the Jupyter Lab interface is right here. We can see basically all the files in my computer. I've got a couple notebooks here that we'll look at in more detail. But basically, one nice thing about Jupyter is you can load in and drop a data set on your computer and then load it in pretty quickly just with the name of the data set. You don't have to worry too much about like where it's stored on your computer and all that. So it makes it a little easier to jump in and start coding. To make visualizations, first thing you need to do is read the data into Python. And so for this example, I'm using we call them guided projects at DataQuest. So this is a guided project that learners go through to analyze traffic volumes on Interstate 94. And so first thing learners do is they read in the data. Similar to what Jenn said about different libraries or packages. In R, you also have that in Python. So pandas is a common package for wrangling data. So that's one of the more common ways to get a data set into Python. And then once you have it in there, it's time to start analyzing the data. And so there's two main libraries for data visualization in Python. One is matplotlib. So matplotlib is kind of the core DataViz library. And then on top of that, there's one called Seaborn. In order to really work with Seaborn, you need to understand matplotlib. So matplotlib is kind of the one to know, the one to start with. But an advantage that Seaborn offers over matplotlib is that it's better for really professional user-facing data visualizations. For the sake of data exploration, here's an example of how we could read in data and compare the traffic volumes on Interstate by hour during the week and also the weekend. So you can see morning rush hour here, evening rush hour, whereas on the weekends, there's kind of more of a busier middle of the day. So it's great for reading data in and getting some information about it. If you want to improve the style, you can use Seaborn. So as I mentioned, Seaborn kind of fits with matplotlib. So in this case, we're using a lot of the same matplotlib code, but we're using a Seaborn theme. And then so it gives you a little bit different theme. And so as you can see, there's a lot of code. So that can be one challenge, is just trying to remember everything. I think it's fairly straightforward to get in and build a very basic plot, but as soon as you want to start customizing your plots, it just takes time to learn everything and understand errors along the way. So that's one of the challenges to really any coding language. But I will show off a little bit of ChatGPT, because one thing that you can do now is if you have errors, you can ask ChatGPT different things. So the plot that we just looked at with the a darker plot, I actually asked ChatGPT, hey, can you build this for me? Here's some code. I'd like to have something more professional. So it said, sure, here, I updated your plot. This one will look more professional. And so scroll down. Now we have more of like a user friendly, more professional look to it. And so I think it's very important to understand the fundamentals of what you want to do with your data, how you want to tell the story behind your data visualizations. But nowadays we have ChatGPT, and you can really leverage it to build off of what you already have. So as long as you have an understanding of what you want to do, ChatGPT can help you kind of iterate on that. And so just as a really silly example, I thought, okay, let's see if ChatGPT knows how to convert this plot to match the Colorado state flag colors. It was like, yeah, sure, here you go. So it spit out a plot that does not look good, and I would never advise to show to anybody, but it's there. So there's extra tools to help you debug code. I would say that's one advantage. I use ChatGPT to debug my R code. I use it to debug my Python code. So keep that in mind. I wouldn't rely on it. I think it's really important to kind of build understanding of coding, but it's here. We can use it, and it helps. So something to consider. So I'll wrap things up, but some of the good things about Python is it's one of the most popular programming languages anywhere. So whereas I think R is great for statistics, R is great for data viz, Python tends to be more of a general purpose programming language. So you can build video games in it, for example. And so it's also open source like R. So everything that I'm showing you here is free. So there's really a lot of resources out there for learning Python. As we see with all this code here, whether you use Matplotlib or Seaborn or both, it's very customizable. So you can really build anything you want with it from a DataViz standpoint. And I think that Jupyter Notebook is really user friendly. And there's a lot of resources available online when you get stuck and need to understand what's going wrong with your Python code or something's funny in your Jupyter Notebook. And as far as like the overall impact, I think once you get used to DataViz and Python, I think Pandas is very powerful for wrangling data. And then so if you know some basics for how to create a plot, then you can really start to understand where there might be problems in the data that you have. It can help you clean up the data. And so it's very, very powerful for exploratory data viz. And once you get into explanatory, then I think you could have a good debate over happy hour as to whether or not you'd want to do that in R with ggplot or with Seaborn. I'm an R guy, so I'm a little bit biased there, but they're both great tools. I would say if you're deciding on R versus Python, it's more like what network do you have? What does your work, what's used at work? With Posit, we now have the ability to work with R and Python together. You can wrangle your data in Python, then pass it to R, do the data viz, and then pass it back. So we have more options than anywhere. So I will wrap up, and next we will move on to Paul to talk about Google Data Studio. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kasey. I had never thought about using ChatGPT to troubleshoot code. I am a very poor R user, so I am definitely going to use that tip next time I get in there. But I digress. So I'm here to tell you all about Google Data Studio. It's a tool that is, I think, actually maybe an overlooked tool, similar when we've been talking about all of these different tools for data communications. I'd say it's probably most similar to PowerBI we've talked about so far in terms of its application. So let me share an example. This is an example from a client that I worked with and my team worked with. So let me share my screen. Okay, can y'all see my screen? So I'm gonna shout out my client, the Early Childhood Partnership of Adams County. They called up Coeffect and we're like, hey, we've got some we're at the point where we know what data we should track. But everybody hates seeing all these data tables. Like, we need to make it more exciting. Nobody's paying attention because it's not compelling enough. I'd love to find a way to visualize our data in some way that's a little bit interactive that people actually pay attention to. So it was the sort of use case here. One important thing to note was that their database was Airtable. And so not a ton of organizations use Airtable, but some organizations really love it. It's a pretty low cost data management tool. It's almost like somewhere in between like an actual database and a set of like Google spreadsheets. It kind of sits in the middle. It's a pretty lightweight database, but good for data management. And so we had to figure out a way to connect to that. So turns out Google Data Studio connects to this, and I'll just show off the one example of the end product here. This was the dashboard that we created, and this is a good example of what Google Data Studio can do. So some of the things you'll notice, the branding, the sort of colors here are colors that they actually use. So we were able to apply their branding to this tool. And you can play with where things sit on the page. You've got a lot of different chart types to play with. We kept things pretty simple here. So some bar charts that made sense. We actually had a few pieces of information where they actually can go in and just update a sentence themselves. Some line charts, that sort of thing. So this actually ended up being a big step forward for them, and it's not rocket science, but it is useful, especially because it connects to live data, their database on the back end. So if you're curious how to interface with Google Data Studio, so one thing that you'll notice first off is this thing sits in a web browser, and it always and only sits in a web browser. And that's a difference between Power BI and Tableau that have a desktop-based user interface for making your visualization. This all happens in the browser. And like all of Google products, it's pretty shareable. There's a share button up here in the top. You can also schedule emails to send report links, download this as a PDF. So the shareability is a big asset. Now, if we go into the edit screen here, so if we click on any one of these charts, you'll see similar aspects to the setup to what David showed in Power BI. So you've got dimensions. These are sort of your axes on your graph. So here, date is our dimension. You have your metrics. So these are the actual data points you're showing. So this is a unique count of families here. You can apply filters to different graphs. And you can also sort of point to data sources. And one of the things that I will say is a downside of Google Data Studio is that you can't do a ton of manipulating your data sources. So I'll show you what I mean. So we ended up having sort of 5 unique tables from Airtable that went into this thing. You can do joins between different tables. So we ended up just doing full joins between the individual table, this other table, et cetera, to make this happen, so that if we wanted to filter all of this, we could filter all of this. But you can't do the same kind of data reshaping that David showed in terms of like doing a lot of expansion, a lot of pivoting, a lot of filtering. Like, Google Data Studio is not as strong in the sort of data prep side of things. You can do some basic joins, that's it, and that's often still useful. One of the things that I wanted to show off here, if I can figure out how to get out of the screen, here it is, styling. So there's some pretty good flexibility in terms of your styling here, adding different reference lines, like labeling axes in different ways, showing like, essentially you can play with the color palette quite a bit. One of the things to keep in mind with Google Data Studio, so you can do a lot of formatting in terms of colors, in terms of placements. When you get into fonts, this is your list of fonts, which is not extensive, right? So a lot of organizations have, a really particular font and care quite a bit about that. That's something that is a limitation. In Google Data Studio, it's a known limitation for actually almost all of Google products. The fonts that you have within those charts, you only have so many of them. And most of the time, that's not the end of the world, but you might make a graphic designer a little bit peeved, when they worked and select the perfect font, and then you can't actually use it in your graph. So the last thing I wanted to show, just in terms of sort of Google Data Studio, which I should mention is now known as Looker Studio because Google purchased Looker. The product, the base product is the same, is connecting to different data sources. So if you were to create, so you can create a brand new report, you can create a data source, which is a connection to live data. And you can see all the different connectors here. So a real asset is that there are a ton of Google connectors that you can leverage. And so a common use case for Google Data Studio is if you're doing a lot of work in Google Ads, for example, like you can connect to that very seamlessly, pull that data in, no trouble, and then start, doing what you need to do with that data. Google Analytics is the same way, but there are also 731 partner connectors. So this was the thing that made the decision really for us. We realized, okay, there are two. There just used to be one Airtable connector. So Google Data Studio itself is free. These connectors sometimes have a cost to it. So this one has a cost of $10 a month, which we felt was well worth it compared to maybe paying hundreds of dollars a month for a different tool. So definitely just keep in mind, one of the purposes of using a tool like this is to try and connect to live data and your visualizations update. When your data updates, you can go into Google Data Studio and just check and see what connectors exist, see if there's a really easy way of connecting to your live data or not. I'll put this in the chat. There's a nice free course that teaches you the basics of Google Data Studio. And Jen, I just copied your idea while we were on this call because I thought that I will certainly miss some stuff too. So here's the recap. Google Data Studio, free asterisk, because you might have to pay to connect to your data with the data source, but Google Data Studio itself is free. It's a free business intelligence tool, flexible formatting, easy to share, seamless integration with Google products. Those are the real strengths of this thing. Downsides, one thing I mentioned we learned was loading times and performance are a little sketch. So, when we had like 5 graphs on a dashboard, that's no big deal. But when we had 15, the thing wouldn't load and it would start erroring out. And so then you end up having to break a dashboard into smaller pages to make the load times low enough that it doesn't error. So there's a performance downside to using the free tool. And when you use a paid or a more robust tool, there's not as many challenges in performance. That was one of the things as a lesson learned from this. Limited fonts. You have some chart types, but I will admit that's probably your chart type library is less extensive than other tools. Like Python are like sky's the limit. Even Power BI has quite a bit. This has fewer chart types, but the basics are covered. And then one of the questions here is, Google acquired Looker. Not exactly sure what the trajectory of these things are. Like, will they make you pay for this thing at some point? Right now, it's a free business intelligence tool. It's kind of unclear kind of where that's headed. But, in its current form, the basics of Google Data Studio or Looker Data Studio are pretty strong. So when do you use it? When money is very much an issue, and branding and shareability are also important. So this was a small nonprofit team. They didn't really have an analyst on staff. They wanted a tool that they could use over and over again without, like having a full-time person doing it. But if they had more resources, they might have chosen a more advanced tool. It's particularly helpful if real-time-ish data is critical and you can find a connector to connect to that real-time data. That's, sort of a difference between some tools are really strong at connecting to live data and some are less strong. Google Data Studio can do it as long as your data source is supported by a connector. Okay, that is the 101 on Google Data Studio. I'll put contact information and stuff here in the chat, but thanks for hearing me out. And I think if I remember right, Pat, you are next to educate us about Alteryx.
Yes, thanks everyone. Yeah, great presentation so far. The one thing I want to say before I jump in is all of these are great tools. I've used most of them. And if I don't, depending on like the skill level of our audience, I'd say as soon as you start learning one, it'll make it easier to learn all of them. So just jump in and just once you start learning, like if you're anything like me, you'll just get addicted and then all these tools become fun and challenging and they all have their pros and cons. But don't let that be like a deterrent of like, if you're new to the data world or data viz space, just start learning. That's my recommendation. So Alteryx is a tool that if you've been to any of the happy hours, I try not to talk about the entire time, but usually end up talking about it all the time. So it's a little bit different of a DataViz tool. I wouldn't call it like a pure data visualization kind of tool like Tableau or Power BI, which obviously can do a lot more than just visualizations. But where I consider it a DataViz tool is it's kind of a visual way of seeing your data be transformed and just kind of understanding what's happening with your data. I didn't put a PowerPoint together, but so first off, I did put a couple of notes. I said, this kind of falls into what a lot of people call like the no code / low code, like kind of category for data tools. What I like about it is it's a little goofy at first. It's a kind of a different, there's definitely some other tools that are similar lists. If you've ever used Tableau Prep, I'm sure they would deny it, but it seems like they basically wanted to copy what Alteryx was doing. But it allows people from all different ranges of technical backgrounds to be able to kind of get up and running and access data that they normally wouldn't have. And then if you have a technical background, it allows you to do some crazy stuff that you don't initially realize. And that's kind of where I have the fun. The negatives on it, it does cost money. It's definitely not cheap. I don't know what a license costs. But if you're in an organization, I think you can pretty easily, once you kind of use it, like prove the value of that cost pretty quick. And they do offer free trials. And I believe they definitely have a student program. So if you're a student, if it's already not offered at your school, you could probably get a license through your school. And they used to have a program, and I think they still might, for people like who were either like laid off as part of like the tech layoffs that want to learn this tool. I hope they still have that. And then the other thing I'd say is there's great community as well. Sorry, I didn't look at what time I started, but so just a little quick overview of the tool. So it's kind of like I said, it's a visual way of seeing your data. So sometimes I describe it as visual SQL, and it'll probably help if I start actually like showing stuff. So I'm just going to run this real quick. This is so another. I'm kind of rambling like normal. They also have a great community, and the example I got today was from, they have weekly challenges, which was a big way that I kind of leveled up my skills in the tool. And so that's what this one is. It's basically, they gave us some basic data, and I used a World Cup one just because most people are familiar with it. So it's basically asking us to take some of the stadium information and the match information and be able to identify which of the teams would have the potential largest audiences in all their matches, and then also find the 3 cities that with the most World Cup matches. And then just the last quick little overview is it gives you a lot of tools that you can kind of just drag and drop. Some people love it, some people hate it. There's a nice regex tool if you're comfortable with that it becomes super powerful. I used a little bit in here, but it's got a drag and drop feel. You can double click on things. It even recommends, depending on which tool you select, what it thinks might be the next tool to use. But just to kind of jump into the demo. So here's our data sets that we were provided. We're given match information for all the World Cup matches, and then we were given some stadium information. And if I remember correctly, we're supposed to find which teams could potentially have the largest audience. So first thing I want to do is I want to do just a join. If anyone's familiar with SQL, they should be familiar with joins. What I like about it is, so I can see this is what's going into the right side of the join. This is what's going to the left side of the join. Can click on all of these things and see, oh, this one, there's no stadium name. So I joined on location and stadium name because location here was the actual stadium. So joined on that. You can see what kind of falls out as on both sides of the join. This wasn't really necessary for the challenge, but the date field here was not formatted in a nice clean date format. So I just did a quick conversion using the date time tool to now say, if I did need to do some calculations or things based off of the actual date, it's now formatted as a nice date field. One thing I needed to do going into it was, since it's looking at the teams, the only team information I have is under these matches. So I have to now split those out if I want to be able to say Portugal or Ghana and whichever team it is. So I did a little, like I said, did a quick here are some regex. I'm replacing the verse sign with a bar. Then I'm using a nice text to columns tool, which will now take that match field and now, so I created this teams one, and then the after effect is it's going to take that teams one, split it at that bar, and now like this results window down here is kind of how you can visualize what's happening with your data. So I had 120 or 64 rows. If I did everything correct, I should be doubling that because I did split to rows. So now it's created a new row for each team. Here's some little things I did with a summarize tool, allows you to just kind of clean up your data, summarize it, do some math on it. But I just wanted to see what my values were after I did that split. So there's did team length, or actually I'll jump into that second. So now it asks to identify the top 10 teams by potential audience. So because I have all these, like, I guess it would be I don't even know the name, the playoff round, whatever it's called in the World Cup. I have some that are not actually like countries. And so what I wanted to see was, is there logic I could do? That's always great when you get an error. Hopefully it doesn't shut down. Like easy logic I could do to just identify which ones are the countries. And of course I could use the length, but then our great US of A messes that up with a length of 3. So I wrote a basic filter here to say where team is either USA or the length of the teams is greater than 3. I did some more regex here, which would work if I wanted to do it that way, but simplify it. Then summarize it down where I say, now take all the teams, all the countries, these are all the teams, take a sum of the capacity column. So sums them up, do a basic sort there. I did this record ID tool to kind of calculate a rank based off of the capacity. And then I said a filter tool where it says where rank is less than or equal to 10. So that's how we get our top 10 teams in terms of attendance. So what I like about it is, like, you can, like, if I wrote this formula wrong, I can just click and see right away, oh, it's not doing what I was expecting it to do. So like, it's a nice just visual way of seeing what is happening at every step of your process. And then you can drag lines to anything else you want. So it's not like you're almost creating like temporary tables across the board. I'm probably getting close on time, so I'll go fast. So the other one was number of matches. So I basically took, sometimes you have to, it's a little weird to see where they're dragging from. But yeah, just taking the, going from there, I can say, okay, take the city, and then I did a distinct count of the number of the match number to see how many matches each of those cities have. Another quick sort. Here's a little bit more efficient, but less intuitive way of identifying the top 3, or just filtering down to the top 3 is I just said take the first 3 rows of my data set and spit that out. So so that's a little bit different way of what I did up here. Then I wanted to show a couple other things real quick. So it does have mapping capabilities built in, like some of the other tools. It was actually started as like a mapping or centric tool. So because they gave us the latitude and longitude, I was able to create those. Now I created, oh, that one doesn't work. I basically wanted to see like how far each team was traveling. It's not perfect, but this would be like several teams and how far they're traveling from each stadium. And actually, here's an even better one. So here's like, this was another challenge like a couple weeks later, was here's the capital city, and there's where all the different stadiums are located. And then in sake of time, I'll show just a very quick chart that I have created. So with, like I said, I'm kind of giving a plug for the weekly challenges. This is my weekly challenge completions over time. So these were charts I built in Alteryx. Again, would probably use a different tool if I was actually like presenting it, but so you can see I've peaked certain months where I did 29 challenges in one month. And then this is the daily me completing them. So there's some chart capability. And then the last thing, I know I'm trying to keep it short on time, was wanted to show some other fun things I do. So I'm doing another demo coming up and wanted to do something else that I could do that you can do if you're creative enough in Alteryx. Was there was a weekly challenge based off Plinko from The Price is Right. So I decided just to make my own Plinko board, and the whole app allows the user to pick and make a board as large as they want to. So in this case, I kind of pre-built the board. So I'm going for that. So I'll go for the 800. So now the next step is I get to choose which opening I want to drop my token in. I'm just going to do this one real time. We'll see how much hypothetical money I win. Oh, good. We got a decent one. Kind of did a lot of movement. So this was just something I built just for fun that I'm going to do a demo on in a different setting. But there are some visualization tools, but where I really highly recommend it is just the ability to see your data in action. And I am a programmer. I do enjoy programming, but I'm the only one on my team who knows any programming. So it's if I write something in code, I'm pretty much locked into it for life. So that's why I enjoy Alteryx, is I can easily transform or transition stuff to other people. Yeah, I definitely am over 7 minutes, so I will end there. Happy to answer questions, or feel free to reach out to me if you have more or want more information. Yeah, I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Pat. And so now we have Kasey to talk about Canva.
Wonderful. I think we're going to take a really hard left turn here. Canva is something that's really great for like public storytelling, but there isn't a lot of data manipulation that happens in the program itself. And so what I'll do is I'll show you, Canva does have a paid version. I think you can get it. There's a free version for everyone. There's an individual paid version that opens up a little bit more functionality of the program, a couple more kind of elements and visuals that you're essentially paying for copyright of. It's about 120 for an individual, and I think it's 140 for a team of up to 5 people. However, one thing that's really nice is I work for a nonprofit, and Canva is pretty committed to providing its services free to nonprofit teams. And so we do have a free version of Canva Pro for Frontline Farming. However, I wanted to actually start with the free version. That's like not the Pro, but just like the basic 0 level to show you where you enter into it. I'll start actually from the dashboard screen. There's a couple things in here that are interesting, and it really is a way to get folks who might not be the most design savvy into some high quality design. So they'll give you some examples, like if you want to create a document, create a whiteboard, a bunch of like infographics or Instagrams. It'll give you some templates that you can use. I created this one with a template that was for an infographic, and the infographic templates that give you are these really long, really long scrollable infographics. That's kind of meant for you to scroll through on a screen. However, on the free version, you cannot resize it. And so resizing is one of the paid functions. And so if you click on a template to create, make sure it is the right dimensions you want to create there. The other thing I found is, even though I have this free version and we have the nonprofit Pro account, I can't transfer designs between my free version and the Pro account. And so there is some copying and pasting that would need to happen if you started on a personal team and then created a work team. You can't really transfer designs between the two of them. What I'll show you here is it gives you some templates. I created this one by selecting a template and then kind of maneuvering some colors around to create what I wanted in this form. Some interesting things about this program. It's really for designers. However, it is a cloud service. So what's nice is that me as like the data communicator on the team can kind of come in and work on the same document as someone who is more of that design or social media person. So they'll dump in a bunch of stuff and I'll come in and be like, well, that's not the right way to present that data. Let's change this graph. Let's make this number bigger, or actually the data changed since we created it. Let me come in and adjust that. And so the sharing platform is one of the big reasons we've used this. And there's a bunch of elements that you can drop in as well. And so if you don't have a really heavy artist on your team, you can kind of look through and use what graphics you want. Graphics are another one of the pro account features. And so if you want like full control of all graphics, getting that pro paid account would be super important. I'll show you this for some of these features. One thing that I really like about it is you have these graphics and you can adjust colors. So if you're talking about representation and in gender or race, there is the ability to control the graphics that you're presenting and making it really cater to who you're talking about. So you can change certain colors within these graphics to make them look and feel the way you want them. Another thing I like about the program, actually, it's something that I don't like about Canva is its graph making abilities. So you can upload a CSV, you can connect it to Google Sheets, but there's very little formatting that it offers you. So sometimes what I've done is I've created a visual in Google Sheets or in Excel, and then exported a JPEG of that graph itself and uploaded it to this platform. And so you can get through it to the uploads. You can create a bunch of project folders and keep yourself organized that way. What I personally like it for, as I said, I'm a qualitative storyteller. And so I actually really like this platform for qualitative storytelling. This graphic was made in 2020, like January of 2022, summarizing the previous year's activities of this outreach network. And so we wanted to communicate the work we were doing with agricultural workers across the state of Colorado, and the challenges that these folks were experiencing. And so it was easy to kind of make almost a comic book style graphic that communicated a lot of the data that we were encountering. Very frequently, for example, ag workers work 6 days a week and only have 1 day a week off. And so they needed help getting to the appointment on their 1 day a week off, because if they missed it, it would be another 6 days before they could even think about rescheduling. And so our promotores, our outreach workers, came in and said, I can help you make calls, and we can get you a ride, and we can provide translation in English and Spanish. And so it's a way to kind of communicate some of that qualitative data if you're not looking to connect directly to a numerical data set. Talking about quantitative data, on the home page, you can go to the Design Spotlight, and there are some graph creation abilities within here. Again, like I said, if you wanted to connect it to a spreadsheet that you already have existing or upload a CSV, you can do that. But what's nice is I like this program also because, as I said, it's collaborative. Some of my team members don't have the same level of data literacy as I do. And so if they want to go and explore what does it mean to present their program's data, they've collected all of these responses from some training program they had on the farm, and they want to explore it themselves, they can come here and say, create a graph and help me choose what graph type. So as data analysts and data scientists, a lot of us have kind of thought through like, what's the difference between a fishbone graph versus like, you know, a bubble map or anything like that. Not everyone has that base level of knowledge, and Canva provides that to your team. And so you can go in and say, I want to choose based on the type of graph I want. Or you can say, I know what graph I want, and it gives you kind of a explanation for everything. And it tells you what a fishbone diagram is, for example. Cause and effect. And so you can come in and like click an example and go in and edit it to match the data that you want to. Editing comes with its own difficulties. As I don't know if I said this, but the workspace on the side doesn't really, you can't really use the workspace on the side, and you can't really navigate layers very well. And so if you have multiple layers, you kind of have to manipulate it and then move it back. It becomes kind of a challenge if you're designing a really heavily layered example. I'm going to stop there because I know that we're at time.
Great. Thanks so much, Kasey. Thanks, everybody. And I appreciate the extra couple minutes. Super quick, Paul, did you want to say a couple words about DDS before we hop off?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again, everybody, for showing up today. You may or may not know, essentially Denver Data Storytellers is the community of data visualization and communication professionals here in Denver, but our events, especially these virtual events, are open to folks broadly. And so we've got a few upcoming events. I know that we'll be having a book club that is scheduled for mid-April, and then we'll have a happy hour scheduled for May. So those are a couple of the upcoming things, and I'll share that out in an email afterwards. Another thing I mentioned, so you'll see in the email, there's actually a pro bono opportunity for somebody, if anybody is willing to help an organization out with data visualization. So I'll include that in the email. And then last but not least, communication channels. So we've got a Slack channel that we can use to communicate and collaborate between meetings. And then we've got an email list. And so I'll be sure to include those in the follow-up message. If you aren't on either or both of those, but want to be, you can access those there. So with that, I know that we're a little bit over time, so we'll let you all go. Thanks again to everybody else who presented, and thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to learn about some of these free and low-cost tools for data visualization. We want to be a conduit for this information, and so I know that most of us are happy to take questions offline, so I think we'll handle it that way. So with that, hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks again for joining us today, guys.
Thanks,
Bye,
Paul.
y'all.
Bye, everybody.